Hi, welcome to Talking Books and Stuff, the program that talks all about books and writing and stuff. Here's your host, Dennis Rimmer.
And this is Talking Books and Writing and Stuff, coming from somewhere in Saskatchewan. I'm Dennis Rimmer. With us today, we have from just east of the Seattle area in Washington State, Karl Marlantes. He's a writer. He was a combat Marine officer in the Vietnam War. Won medals, if you want to say "won" as a word like that. Has a couple other books out. The one we're going to talk about mainly is called Matterhorn, a novel of the Vietnam War. He also has Deep River, a fiction book, right? And What Is It Like to Go to War? So, hello, Karl. How are things in Washington today?
Well, cloudy with a bit of drizzle, pretty typical. At about 42 degrees. Everything else is about normal. Yeah.
So you started out in Seaside, Oregon, and is that right?
That's correct. It was then a logging town because we were still logging old growth back then, and then of course all the old growth. I mean, the peak of the cut was in my little Clatsop County was 1972, and then, unlike other industries where they tail off, when the trees are gone, it doesn't tail off; it's gone. And so now my little logging town has a beautiful beach, and so I sort of say it's a place for people to vacation or retire to who can't afford to go to sunshine. So
well, it's a tourist mecca, I guess, for lots of. Like I grew up just out there in White Rock Crescent Beach, just north of Blaine. And
oh, sure, yeah.
And then I heard about Seaside, Oregon from lots of people because we went there. There's like the Ferris wheel kind of thing and playground, and beaches, and we even stayed there a couple of years ago. So we're talking books and writing and stuff with Karl Marlantes, and the one that got me interested in Karl was Matterhorn, a novel of the Vietnam War. And it took you more than a couple of years to write. 35 years in all, was that it?
Well, yeah, it actually took 35 years to get published. I had a draft, which I thought was a pretty good draft after several earlier attempts by the late 70s, but I could not get anybody to read it. It was just a very unpopular war. And no, I mean, I think, the people in New York basically just didn't think they could sell it. And so I wrote hundreds of query letters to get someone to even try to read it. It just wasn't published until 2010. And then it hit the New York Times bestseller list. That's that old joke, the 35-year overnight success.
Right. So, and now your Vietnam War experiences, you were going to Yale out of high school from Seaside, Oregon, I take it, and an Oxford scholar, because Rhodes Scholar, is that right?
That's correct, yes.
We have Rhodes Scholars come out of Canada as well. And
oh, yeah.
And then you decided...
We all get together over there.
All right, and you decided, heck with this student life, I think I'll join up. It wasn't quite that easy a decision, was it?
No, it was, first of all, I had joined out of high school. I joined the Marines. And, back in those days, there was the draft, and, everybody's dad had been in World War II. And so you sort of felt like it was like taxes. No one wanted to get drafted. No one wants to pay their taxes. But you felt it was sort of part of your duty as a member of the Republic. And the boys served, and so I joined the Marines, so I didn't have to be in the Army. I wanted to be the best and all that. And there was no war going on, and I thought I'd guard embassies someplace. Literally, I'm 18. You can imagine what's going on in a kid's head. But anyway, so I was in the Marine Corps Reserve when I was at Oxford, and they let me go. They were perfectly happy for me to get my degree and spend it 2 years, but I just couldn't stand it because I was kind of hiding behind the privilege. And 5 boys from my little high school died in Vietnam, and there I am drinking beer and hanging out with the girls and having a good time. And then my friends who I trained with in the Marines, but they were going to Vietnam or were already there, and so I finally just. It was very hard. I mean, because the war was problematical. I think that's a good word for it. I mean, it just didn't make sense. But I was in, and, the president, tells you what to do if you're in the military, and you can't have the military deciding political stuff. That's called a banana republic. And so you have 2 moral conflicts. I had the conflict of I'm an officer in the Marine Corps, and I should do what I'm told and defend the Constitution, et cetera, et cetera. And on the other hand, the war just didn't look very smart or even moral. It was a terrible time. And in fact, interesting for Canadians, there was a guy named Mike Frederickson, another Rhodes Scholar, and he and I spent a whole night trying to decide what to do about it. And he turned in his draft card and moved to Canada. And I sent a letter to the Marines and was in Vietnam 8 months later.
Do you remember the first time you stepped off the plane in Vietnam, the first day? What was it like?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it was surreal. We had gotten to Okinawa, which is a Marine staging place, basically. There was a lot of bases there left over from World War II. I mean, Vietnam was still pretty close to World War II, only 20 years out. And we were on a commercial airplane. I can remember, stewardesses, walking along in, beautiful stewardess uniforms and high-heeled shoes clicking on the concrete floor, and I'm going to war. I mean, it was just really weird. And then we flew into Da Nang and got off the plane, and they all, sort of said good luck, and down we go, and it's really hot. And I was there a couple of hours, and then they put me on the floor of a C-130, I think is what it was, one of those cargo planes. Got me up to Dong Ha, which is right underneath the militarized zone where the Marines were. And then a couple of days later, I'm dropped into the jungle up in the mountains, and that was sort of my coming to the country.
Yeah, welcome to the country. And you were, I'm going to say first lieutenant, but a first lieutenant in the Marines?
That's correct.
So you were in charge of how many guys?
Well, a Marine platoon commander, full strength is 43, but we were never at full strength, so usually in the high 30s before an operation. And then I became the executive officer of the company, and that's like about 212 Marines, complete full strength, but usually we were about 180 or something like that.
So in the book Matterhorn, a novel of the Vietnam War, it starts off with your group, I'll say you, meaning the main character, I think might be based a little bit on your life. Well,
yeah, everything that Mellis sees, I saw, and so write what you know about. But Mellis, I had an older brother who was a wonderful corporate politician, just really good at that, and another friend who was sort of a kingmaker, and so I used their personalities to be Mellis, because Mellis is way more political than I am as an individual. But everything he sees, I saw. And also, he's very much based on the Parsifal character out of that Parsifal myth, out of the Grail cycle, and so there's a lot of that involved in his character as well.
So it starts off, you get dropped into this jungle, it's raining, you have to take a hill, Matterhorn, for whatever reason, and everybody gets shot up, and then they tell you to abandon it, basically. Is that kind of like what happened a lot over there?
It absolutely happened all the time, because my analysis is that there was no military solution or even objective to the war. It was political, and they didn't. There were all these restrictions. It wasn't like World War II, where my dad lands on Utah Beach and then they cross the Seine and then they cross the Rhine and then they get to Berlin. We had nothing like that. And so the only thing that they had was what they call body count, which is not a goal. It's a measurement that is dicey at best.
Right.
And so we would assault a hill and rack up the body count, not to mention a whole lot of casualties, because when it's usually it's 3-1 against you if you're on the offense, because you're above the ground and they're dug in. Real simple math. And then when we took the hill, like one of the hills we took 484, it was about a 7-day battle for it, and we abandoned it. We walked off of it. I can't tell you how devastating that is to an 18-year-old. I mean, it's really, really hard to explain.
And like I say, it makes no sense. Other wars, well, if you want to call it good wars, World War II, my dad was in the Air Force, but he didn't have to leave the country. He was just always in Canada. Mm-hmm. I had uncles who landed in Sicily and both got shot up, and other people I knew from Second World War, their parents, same thing. And then there's me, who is I'm a few years younger than you. I just turned 70, but basically grew up in the same time, same era, same place. I'm in White Rock Crescent Beach across the border from Blaine. I go to Blaine, I see a monument. Guys my age were killed in Vietnam, and it's like, it's a completely different world. I didn't have to worry about that growing up. And you guys are always kind of living with that in the back of your mind, knowing that, you had the draft and all that stuff. And so one of these days you're going to have to face that inevitable. So, and you had some...
well, that's gone. And it's got its own, I think, serious consequences, because now the country at large is basically divorced from the consequences of going to war. So there's no blowback on the politicians. And I think that the all-volunteer military, I call it the all-recruited military. It's a little different. Volunteers are when the Japanese bomb Pearl Harbor and everybody rushes down to sign up. That's a volunteer.
Right.
What we have is a little different. And I just think that the elites now no longer fight. Very few kids that go to Yale or Harvard or Pomona join the military these days. Whereas when I was young, there was a place called Wolseley Hall at Yale, and carved on the marble walls of that giant hall were hundreds and hundreds of names of dead Yaleys that had fought in World War II and Korea and the First World War, and they don't even join today.
And it seems like America's never, ever not at war. Like that Afghanistan and Iraq thing's been going on for 20 years almost.
Yeah, talk to me about it. Absolutely. It baffles me. And it baffles a lot of Americans. But I think, again, what I was saying earlier is that there's not a lot of political blowback, because these poor guys that are... I'll tell you, here's an example. I was at Fayetteville, North Carolina, doing a reading. And there's the usual line of, people standing to get their book signed. And this young man, I mean, he's probably about 20, and his wife, she's got a toddler, dragging in one arm and a baby in the other arm. And they're standing in front of me, and he's in his uniform there. And she starts crying. And I'm going, whoa, what's the matter? And she points to her husband, and she says, he's shipping out tomorrow. He's shipping out again tomorrow. Okay. And I turn to this kid, and I say, wow. I said, your second tour? No, sir, my 7th.
Oh, 7th.
See, that's where the burden of this war has lain, and the general population escapes the problems, but there's some kid and his wife and 2 children, and he's done 7 tours. That's absolutely outrageous.
Well, you'd think after 7 your luck might run out sooner or later.
You know it. Yeah, absolutely.
I always wondered about going to war, because I know I don't think very fast. And if there was an emergency, I'll take the most ridiculous solution instead of doing something straightforward. So I figured, I'm so glad I was never in a shooting war, because I would have been dead within a day and a half. I just can't think fast enough to get out of the way of anything. So,
well, there's 2 interesting things about what you just said. One is, of course, that 95% of military people never are in action. I mean, military today is very technical. I mean, radar technicians, mechanics, people that, publicity officers. I mean, you name most of the jobs in the military today, and until you get down to the special units like the Marines or the Rangers, are, not, quote, on the front line. It's not that way. So that's one thing. The other one is if you are in those situations, the brain actually changes under extreme adrenaline loads. Normally, you think it's like, there's a twitch, there's a sound. I wonder what that is. That's thinking, and the input goes through the frontal cortex. And you're right. If you take your time to think, well, gee, is that a twig falling? Is that the wind? Is it an animal? Or maybe it's the enemy. By that time, you are dead.
Right.
But the brain under that load switches all the neural pathways so that it goes directly from the input, the amygdala, which is fight, flight, freeze. There is no more thinking. But that's one of the roots of post-traumatic stress. So if someone comes up behind you in the bar and touches you on the shoulder, you're not thinking, gee, I'm in a bar, maybe somebody just wants to get by me or anything. Your brain has been rewired to react instantly. If there's a sound in the bush, you turn and shoot it. There's no thinking. And so if a guy taps you on the shoulder in a bar, you turn around and hit him.
Yep.
There's no thinking. And so in a way that what you're saying is that I wouldn't have survived very long. That's true until you get your brain changed. And so, because most casualties do happen early in a person's tour. And then after they get wired differently, they have a higher chance of survival, but they carry it with them the rest of their life. There's no going back.
And the post-traumatic stress disorder is just ripples through the ages. I heard a story about my uncle when he came back from Second World War. He slept on the floor in their bedroom with his wife for 3 years after the war. He didn't go into an actual bed for 3 years. So,
well, hey, I was in a veterans group, Marines, and honestly, I said, this is kind of weird. I wonder if any of you other guys this way. I said, but I sleep on the floor. I don't have a bed. And that was like 20 years after the war. And everybody in the room, there were like 8 of us in this group, none of them slept in bed. They were all combat veterans, and none of them slept in bed. You felt safer on the floor.
Okay.
Is that interesting?
I guess that answers it. Yeah, that's weird.
Your uncle was normal. That's what's interesting.
And I think that's the thing with our parents and grandparents who came out of the Second World War. They didn't have any resources. They called it, combat fatigue or shell shock or something. And
there's a lot of different words for it, yeah.
Well, one of my uncles...
But go ahead.
Yeah, no, one of them was an alcoholic, became an alcoholic, and I'm sure it had something to do with being in the Army.
Totally.
And getting shot at. And
well, I always kid World War II veterans. We were having less and less of them, but every once in a while, we didn't have post-traumatic stress. What's wrong with you guys? And I said, and we didn't have 3 martini lunches every day.
Exactly. And when their war was over, it was over. You went there for 13 months or something, and then okay, now I get to go home, and somebody else gets to take my place and get shot at instead of me. So, just to catch everybody up, we're talking with Karl Marlantes. Main book is Matterhorn, a novel of the Vietnam War. This is Talking Books and Stuff. I know we've been all over the place. We just had a case the other day, a veteran from the Canadian military, on the steps of the Alberta legislature. He shot himself. And it's still going on. And my brother-in-law, I think, Canada was in Afghanistan for a long time. He went 2 tours over there. I don't think he said he went outside the wire, but it was bad enough anyway. Is there much being done yet to help people with PTSD, or not enough, or is there anything that can ever be done?
Well, they're trying. I mean, first of all, it's enormously better known and understood than when we came back from Vietnam. So there's been progress, but the suicide rates are still outrageous. I mean, I think that I can't remember the exact statistic, but it's like multiple people dying every day from suicides. No one knows exactly how to stop it, because the first thing is that you can't reach these people because they don't want to go to the VA. They're isolated, so there's that problem. The second problem is that their families don't know what to do about it, so there's no warnings. And so it's not just necessarily a problem of the government. It's also a problem of education and people seeking the help. And they try. I mean, there's hotlines for veterans and there's counseling for veterans. And I have to give them credit. There's way more tries of trying to stop this suicide rate, but they've been unsuccessful. And no one has figured out exactly how to stop it. And I think that it's just, I tend to say it's just part of the sorrows of war. If you're going to commit young men to fighting and those kinds of stresses, I'm afraid that all the wounds are just simply not physical, and they bring them back and succumb later. I don't know if we'll be able to figure it out. Right now, it's not for lack of trying. I give them credit. They do try, but they haven't figured it out yet.
That's right. And back to your book, Matterhorn, which I recommend to anybody and everybody who wants a real taste of what it's like, if that's possible. You had a guy in the book, Vancouver. So was there lots of Canadian-type guys that kind of showed up?
Well, we had two. Marines are all volunteers. Right. And Vancouver is actually he is based on the most real person I knew over there, a guy named George Jemea, who was from Osoyoos, British Columbia.
Yeah,
and he was an archetypal warrior. I mean, he was about 6'3". He looked like Errol Flynn. He had one of these Australian bush covers with the folded up top on the side, and He did carry a sawed-off M60 machine gun by himself, would always walk point, and was an iconic person. I mean, he was young. He was probably 19, but he graduated first in his class from boot camp down at Camp in San Diego. And I remember talking to him once. George, what are you going to do when you get, are you going to stay in the Marine Corps or what? And he said, nah. He says, I just couldn't stand to be in the peacetime Marine Corps. And he said, I kind of felt like I was born in the wrong country at the wrong time. He said, I don't know, maybe I'll go to Africa. They're hiring people over there. He was that kind of kid.
Yeah.
But he wasn't crazy. I mean, I admired him greatly, and he died saving guys in his platoon. And there are 4 guys today who wear silver bracelets with his name on it because they're alive, because he died saving their lives. An incredible hero. I mean, he was just an incredible person. And so I kind of memorialized him in the character Vancouver, but it really is based on a real Canadian Marine named George Jemea.
Well, and also there's lots of black versus white kind of tension in the squad. Absolutely. And I'm wondering, why would any black person ever want to go to war for a country that treated them like shit?
Well, there's two sides to it. One is that different parts of the country treated them at different levels of like shit. So there's that. But there's a lot worse coming from a southern state where it was actually in the law to be treated that way.
Yeah, especially in the mid '60s still. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we forget how bad it was, and there's a lot of reasons. I mean, they honestly, have the same sorts of ideas of patriotism in America, and they know it's flawed and it's not working, but they, their dad served in World War II, just like my dad did. I mean, there's a lot of that. The other is that they're young men, and, you don't join just because of patriotism. It's sort of like, well, I can remember, I'm playing football in this little logging town, and the football players tended to join the Marines, and they would disappear and come back 6 or 8 months later, and I swear they were 3 inches taller and 4 inches wider in the shoulder, and they'd swagger up and down this little town, Main Street, this little town of ours. And I'm 17. I'm saying, I want some of that. Whatever that is, the Marines have got.
Yeah.
I'm going to go down there and find out if I can get it. So, African-American kids are the same as, Finnish kids and Italian kids are the same. I mean, the boys want to know if they can get some of that. And they want to know if they can make it through boot camp. And they want to know all those things. So it's not just about the country. It's also about psychology.
And it's about yourself, and what you think you can do or not do.
Exactly, it's a challenge, and they have exactly the same motivations. But yes, I mean, you do wonder, and they were angry about it. I mean, that's where a lot of what I explore in the novel. They were angry, and some of them went over the edge and got violent. And there were, I think, the actual stats. It's something like 207 fraggings in Vietnam. A fragging, they use a hand grenade called a fragmentation grenade, and would roll it under somebody's bunk or into their hooch or into their fighting hole. And that way there's no evidence. I mean, there's no fingerprints. There's no anything knowing who did it. There were 207 murders, almost all of them racially motivated, and almost all of them by angry African-American kids. But you can't deal honestly with that time period in America, the 60s, without dealing with the racism. And, where the rubber hit the road was the civil rights movement, the freedom fighters, those people that went down to the South, and Martin Luther King and that whole movement. They changed the laws. But where the rubber hit the road in terms of the races actually figuring out that they can get along and work together and not be afraid of each other, I give the military a lot of credit. It was worked out in Vietnam. When you're out in the bush, you didn't care what color the guy was. You just wanted to know if he could shoot a machine gun straight. And
that's right.
Whether you were black or white, you realized pretty quickly that your life depends upon this other kid. And by God, they're the same as you are. And so that's where it started to actually work. I give the military a lot of credit, but it wasn't easy. No. I mean, I tell people, I said, you think there was tension in the high schools, trying to integrate the high schools. Well, imagine arming all the kids in the high school with automatic weapons and hand grenades. That's real tension,
Oh, boy. It's and one of the incidents in the book, they have the blacks and whites, I'll call them, have a dispute over the length of the hair. Some white guys are allowed to a bit longer, but the black guys couldn't, so that started up.
Yeah, it was one of those cultural things. The black kids' hair curled, obviously, a lot of them, most of them, and so if their hair was the same length, it would actually, because it was curled like that, it would actually bush out, and it wouldn't look quite as military. And so, and like they say about the Marine Corps, it's mostly from the South and South Boston. And there were just a lot of, particularly, non-commissioned officers who were from the South, who were raised in a segregated society, and they didn't see why these African-American kids should look any different than the white kids, and so they get on their cases. And just because of their hair did happen to curl differently, they had to cut it shorter if they wanted to look the same. Well, it wasn't about the hair. It was about the decades of bad treatment, and it was about the anger, and that was an iconic way that it was expressed. It could have been handled better, but again, we're talking about the 60s, and we're talking about, some staff sergeant who grew up in Georgia. Yeah. He doesn't think about it. He doesn't know what to do, and he thinks that the Marine Corps is being, looks bad because people don't have any discipline. I mean, you can understand the way they're thinking, and so that sort of trivial thing became a cause, and that's where people hung their hats. It wasn't about the hair, though. Clearly, it was about the racism.
This is Talking Books and Writing and Stuff, talking with Karl Marlantes from just east of Seattle, down there in Washington State. Matterhorn, a novel of the Vietnam War. If you get a chance, please go and pick it up. But you have a fiction book out, Deep River. Tell us about that.
Yeah, Deep River is a novel set at the turn of the last century in the logging camps of Southwest Washington. And the protagonist is a woman who's a Finnish immigrant and her brothers, who all come to America with a different idea of how to be in the world. She, because of what happens to her in her childhood, is a radical labor organizer, communist, and gets involved with the IWW. And she's going to fall in love with a guy who's just the opposite of her. He doesn't want anything to do with big unions or corporations. He wants his own fishing boat. And it's sort of an exploration of this tension, certainly in U.S. culture, between the individual and the collective. We never seem to get it straight. We just seem to bounce back and forth, instead of realizing that you need both, to make the society work correctly. So it's basically a story of this woman's life and her loves and her triumphs and her disappointments.
Sounds kind of like your grandmother.
Yeah, you must have been reading something. Yes, my grandmother was a communist and a very low-level IWW member, and worked in the logging camps, in the cook shacks and the dining halls and mess halls. And so I got some stories from her about that time period, which all obviously have gone into the novel. But, I mean, the principal character is not her. I mean, the principal character is far more romantic than my grandmother. But, I do think a lot about my grandmother because, I used to laugh. I tell people, I said, and this is a true story, she lived in Astoria, which is about 15 miles north of where I grew up. And I'd go up to visit Grandma. And I always thought that the Daily Worker was the local Astoria newspaper. And I didn't realize until I was like in high school that it was a national Communist Party newspaper.
So you have your grandmother giving you, or you're reading the Daily Worker at her place, then you go over and fight communists. How did that how did that work with her?
Well, I have to tell you, when I went to say goodbye to her, I'm in my Marine uniform and I'm about to go off, and of course I'm worried, scared. I don't know if I'm coming back. And she just sort of looks me in the eye and says, "I don't know why you're going over there to fight for Wall Street millionaires, but I hope you come back."
That's about it.
So much for that sent off.
Okay, so that's Deep River. And what is it like to go to war is some nonfiction, I assume?
Yes, it is. It's nonfiction, and it deals with, like we were talking about, post-traumatic stress, and it deals with the spiritual aspects of combat. I mean, you're involved in killing, and people don't want to think deeply about when we're dealing with death. We are dealing with religion and spirit, and whether you are an atheist or not, you have to understand that death is, in fact, what it's all about when you're at war, your own and the taking of other people's lives. And it's a book that explores that.
And so they're all three available right now, I'm sure. Do you have any?
Yes, they are. Any
sort of a website or place to people to come?
No, I don't. I mean, my publisher is Grove Atlantic in New York City, and they have a website. And I've got a piece of that, but I have a hate relationship with social media.
Oh, okay.
I just don't like it.
It's been a pleasure talking to you, Karl Marlantes, their guest today here on Talking Books and Writing and Stuff. I'm Dennis Rimmer. If you like us, tell us and tell your friends. And if you don't like us, keep it to yourself. No, just kidding. Thank you for listening. And Karl, nice chatting with you. Maybe we'll meet up one day.
Yes, that would be great.
Thank you for visiting with us today. This is Talking Books and Stuff with Dennis Rimmer. Contact him at dennis@talkingbooks.tk. Thank you, and may all the good news be yours. Oh, and don't forget to check out his book, The Great Canadian Notebook, available across Canada and at amazon.ca.
I hope you've been enjoying Talking Books and Stuff. Please support us on Patreon to help cover our costs. Please click on the Patreon links, or you can visit our GoFundMe page. Thank you.